Have you ever looked at a map of Australia and thought, nice shape? In fact, it is a shape. But then immediately after that also thought, it just needs one thing. Ah, perfect. Then this is the video for you. Sydney, this is your last chance ever to get tickets to my show about UFOs where you will hear the truth. Selling fast. There's very few tickets left for that. And then Melbourne, go get your tickets for that as well. Links below. This video isn't about reality. It's about something way less gay. Fantasy. But not like the type of fantasy neckbeards like to retreat to where they're a goblin wench. My special power is the ability to make eye contact in social situations. This is the fantasy of that other type of neckbeards, shed beards, whose fantasy is cars. Their version of escaping to some land called EverQuesting Gale is,
yeah, mate, Australians always complaining, oh, there's not enough water. Mate, just make a big fucking lake, it'll be beautiful. Put some yabbies in there, I don't know what else lives in a lake. Bunyips, aren't those endangered?
Boys, let me know in the comments, but I actually think that this is one of those Roman Empire things where most Aussie men have thought about what it would be like if we had an inland sea. I'm largely basing this theory off of some of the most rock-solid data there is on what the average male thinks. Big footy forum posts. And I'll tell you this, you're not completely crazy for thinking that Australia should have an inland sea. You're just very, very stupid. After all, it did happen. We had one about 100 million years ago during the early Cretaceous period called the Eromanga Sea. Yes, that is the real name. There you go, neckbeards. I knew you'd like this video. And here it was. I really got to stop spending thousands of dollars to get 2 seconds of footage. It covered most of inland Queensland, parts of northern New South Wales and South Australia. That's 100 million years BK, before Qatar. That's right. It even predated Lebanese migration to Australia. This is earlier than the Qatar dynasty. Although I assume Bob's evolutionary ancestors were probably living it up as mermaids in that lake even back then, and much like his grandfather, migrated to Australia. Because they weren't spending any more time in it when every 3 months another Lebanese mermaid gets ripped apart by a dinosaurus. Now, in case you're wondering why we don't have that lake now, if we look at a modern map of Australia and, oh no, that's not a modern map. I must have mixed my files up. No, just kidding. I know it's not a modern map of Australia, guys. In fact, it was a map from the 1820s, before Europeans had explored much of inland Australia. They had managed to discover most of Australia's major rivers like the Darling, the Macquarie, the Murray, the Murrumbidgee rivers. I don't know if they discovered Joan rivers. I think the Americans discovered that one. It was the same era though. But they noticed that they all flowed westward away from the ocean. Thanks to guys like Matthew Flinders who'd already sailed around Australia mapping its coastline, they also knew that there weren't any massive river deltas anywhere that usually occur when big rivers meet the sea, like the Nile or the Ganges. Oh, sorry, that's not the Ganges, that's a sewer. Ah, well, same shit. Anyway, logically, the only plausible answer to where the water could be going was a yet undiscovered inland sea, which sadly, even in our time, stubbornly remains undiscovered. The only problem with the Australian inland sea theory was that discovering this inland sea would involve going on a really long trek through largely unknown land, a really long way away from any kind of help or assistance. To give you an idea, South Australia hadn't even been founded at this point, and even today, would you be relying on Adelaide for help? It needs more help than you. Enter Charles Sturt, the guy the university franchise is named after, I think. Could have easily looked that up. Instead, I chose to look up this. Mr. Sturt was a British officer and explorer who was a classic child of the British Empire's bureaucratic middle class. So I'm imagining that he had one of those photos where you look at it and you think, are those dolls that have been brought to life? As opposed to that same era of working class kids' photos.
Hello. You could mistake me for a 40-year-old you could.
His father worked as a judge in Bengal for the East India Company. He was sent to a British boarding school at the age of 5. He only just missed out on Cambridge thanks to his dad not having enough cash. And so like everyone else in that predicament, joined the army when you're too dumb for a scholarship. He showed up in Sydney escorting a boatload of convicts and thought, well, now that I'm here, hey, Governor of New South Wales, can you let me lead an expedition to chart the course of the Macquarie River? And the governor was like, yeah, okay. Wouldn't that be awesome? Being a Victorian-era explorer. Isn't it so much better having an exploratory job back then as opposed to having an exploratory job now? Now, it's important to note Australia was also in the middle of a drought, so it was hot. How hot are we talking? Well, according to Sturt, at one point on the journey, they recorded a temperature of 129 Fahrenheit in the shade and 149 Fahrenheit in the sun, which, for all those non-Americans watching, 54 degrees Celsius and 65 degrees Celsius respectively. Now, before any of you car profiles start typing,
See, it was hotter back then. Calmly dismantled with calligraphy and mercury.
they got those temperatures while they were standing in the middle of the bush on an 1820s thermometer. If these records were even close to accurate, 65 degrees would be 15 degrees hotter than the hottest temperature ever recorded in Australia, and 8 degrees hotter than the hottest ever recorded temperature in the world. So, yes, we can only conclude that it was hotter back then. Your suspicions are correct. Rowan Dean is smarter than everyone at the CSIRO and Weather Bureau combined. Thank God he wasn't alive to experience that weather, as I'm sure that his mummified skin would have caught on fire. Actually, maybe that's why he has mummified skin. I think that's him.
Hello. What's all this net zero then?
To give you an idea, in the same journal, Sturt mentions hearing an extraordinary sound that the party thought sounded like cannon firing that apparently came from the northwest of their current location, i.e. further inland from where they were. We never got an answer as to what that was. That's the end of that. So, quite an extraordinary journey. Not only had he endured the hottest day on record by a mile, but also he seems to have discovered that the French had settled in the middle of Australia somehow, presumably through a system of tunnels, and I guess their idea was to work their way to the coast. Why didn't they teach us that at school, eh? Anyway, it took them 2 months to make the journey from the end of the Macquarie River, where they discovered another river. It was the Darling River. I'll tell you, this entire story is funny in how anticlimactic it is. It's like history's version of a Flight of the Conchords episode. So the Inland Sea question remained unanswered. However, the governor had another river that he wanted Sturt to look into. So later that year, he set off to find the endpoint of the Murrumbidgee. This time, it took Sturt only about 14 days to get to the end because the river was big enough for them to leisurely sail a boat down. Isn't his life great? Paid to go on a mystery destination cruise. This time he found an even bigger river. It was the Murray River. That one flowed west too, so the team kept travelling westward, following the Murray until they came across the point where the Darling meets the Murray, and at that point, Sturt was fairly hyped. He wasn't convinced there actually was an inland sea, mind you, but he was definitely enjoying exploring these rivers, naming them, hanging out with the boys, racing the Union Jack, generally just having a really pleasant time. It was basically just the first of these c***s. That's a big fish, man. Eventually makes it all the way to the end of the Murray River, ending up in a big lake. Ooh, what a twist. I suppose that is the inland sea of Australia. Lake Alexandria. Naturally, to say that this discovery killed the vibe would be an understatement. They'd confirmed without any doubt that the end point of these massive rivers was not a huge inland sea, but a coastal lake that the British already knew about. Sturt immediately clocked where they were based on old coastal maps made by Matthew Flinders. The lake was also really shallow and didn't flow directly into the ocean, so it was useless for shipping or transportation. Basically, they traveled for 1,400 kilometers, made no practical discoveries, and now had to make it back to Sydney against the river, having used up most of their supplies. To make a long story short, they worked their way back up the Murray and the Murrumbidgee, rowing their boats against the currents, hoping the wind would blow in the right direction and occasionally having to drag the boat over the shallow bits. It was so grim that they were blasting parrots out of the air to eat, which apparently reminded Sturt of how few new species they'd also discovered on the trip. This is the furthest thing from exotic. You think that would be the end of the lame disappointments, right? Wrong. 15 years later, a now almost 50-year-old man Sturt, who tried to make a name for himself in the new colony of South Australia and ended up not doing that and losing a bunch of money in the process, decided, actually, you know what, fuck you. There is an inland sea, and I'm going to find it by exploring the desert. He somehow got that approved. I think it was because he picked a fight with the governor of South Australia, so the governor thought, okay, here, just get out of here. And they travelled north along the Darling River, where he figured he'd find the inland sea at its endpoint. It hit about December, and now we spend our entire Christmas in aircon. Imagine how hot that would have been in 65 degrees Celsius time, guys. They started running out of water. Some of the men got scurvy. It all started going to shit pretty quickly, and they were stuck camping by the one creek that hadn't dried up for 6 months until they were saved by heavy rains. Which, if you know anything about inland Australia, this is what you would note as the true surprising twist in this story. You know what Sturt decided to do after that? He decided to head further inland. Oh, really wanted there to be a sea at the end just so he could end up being one of those men of destiny we always mythologize about battling against the odds, but instead it's everyone thought he was crazy, but this is one of those 99.9% of stories where
They are just crazy.
Obviously, his party were begging him, please can we go back? I'm sick of drinking mud. To which Sturt said, no! More mud! Powered on! Got to the edge of the Simpson Desert! And that's where Sturt finally conceded, okay, there's not going to be an inland sea. Also, I have scurvy. Somehow Sturt survived the return trip and retired back to England, where he became an official Australia expert, which I suppose he was qualified for. After all, he was the most qualified man in the world to determine that there is fuck all here. And it was on that trip that I successfully determined parrots are a poor substitute for chicken. Anywho, that's it then. There's no inland sea. We've settled the whole thing. Charles Sturt nearly killed himself 3 times to prove this point. However, Plan B, make the inland sea ourselves. Base and late Cretaceous era peeled. Finally, we're at the point of the video where we can actually talk about some of the real true blue Aussie shit, which is a bunch of guys looking at someone else try anything and say,
What a fucking idiot. Just do what I reckon. Someone with no expertise at all.
And a John Bradfield, otherwise known as the guy who designed the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So yeah, he was a visionary, but come on, that is quite a haunting ambition. I have brought land over the ocean. Now ocean will come over the land. It is movie villain epic, I'll give it that. Queensland seriously considered it in the 30s. Pretty much every party in Australian politics is supported it at one point or another. And it's still supported by some of the most preeminent thinkers of today, like the Queensland LNP, Barnaby Joyce, Pauline Hanson. And of course, if these two are on the list, not far behind is everyone's favourite leb. Yeah! A C's just a big day! All the most fried still think this is a mad idea. I don't know how they think it's going to work. But frankly, figuring out how any of them think on anything is a matter for neuroscience. But back in the day, the idea was to dam the Tully River, divert that into the Herbert River, dam the Herbert River, and then divert that into the Burdekin River, dam the Burdekin River and divert that into the Flinders River, divert the Flinders River into the Thompson River, and then BAM! Got yourself a big-ass lake. This would have brought more water into central and southeast Queensland and allowed farmers across the inland of Australia to grow way more crops such as rice, cotton, flax, jute, whatever that is, wheat, tropical fruits. Oh, you could grow anything there apparently, orchids to cacti. Do like the enthusiasm. I do think this is also another man thing where we all have that one idea that we're overly optimistic about, don't we? This really seems to be the I have an idea for an app of rural Australia. Seems like a good idea, so why didn't we build this giant Fruit Loops and Wheat Beaks depot after all? Plan isn't too dissimilar from the Snowy Mountain scheme. I'm guessing it had something to do with the fact that unlike the Snowy Mountain scheme, it was, quote, physically impossible. Turns out that Bradfield committed the classic engineering blunder of vastly overestimating the amount of rainfall going into these rivers that he wanted to divert. He thought, yeah, we'll just assume that it gets double the amount of rainfall that it does, which, if they did, would mean that there'd be no need for the fucking inland sea to begin with. And yet the dream lives on in the minds of the next generation of scientific visionaries. The Curious Three! The CSIRO actually tried explaining to them yet again, guys, this isn't going to work. And we have the direct response from Kata to that.
That irritates me, and I punch blokes in the mouth for saying that.
The CSIRO were trying to explain that these rivers get even less rainfall now due to climate change. But when have these three ever been foolish enough to trust an institution captured by climate alarmists? And so they push on. Well, not really. I think they just entertained their voter base's delusions, probably in pubs. But what's the moral of this story? Well, first of all, the idea that we can make an inland sea is still up for debate. The CSIRO reckons it can't be done. Big Footy Forums reckons it can. I'll let you have the captain's call on that one. Second, everyone on the crossbench is a fucking idiot. They all push some stupid, impossible idea to make some fringe of society go, yeah, just do that, ignoring 100 years of science, while Labor's trying to negotiate very complicated water agreements in the Murray-Darling to make sure we preserve the most important water system in the country. You've got Bob Catter yelling in their ear, just make a big inland sea! I want to grow rice in the desert! And look, even while I'm saying it dismissively, it would be sick. So I say, who gives a shit what 100 years of brainiac bean counters think? The Bush knows best! Sure, it didn't work when the Russians did it. In fact, it destroyed an entire inland sea and caused one of the largest ever man-made environmental disasters. But Australia's got that digger spirit. We'll make that Antipodean Mediterranean a reality. At least in the process, we'd make some nutty Queensland farmers happy. And after all, Isn't that what Australian politics is all about? Sadly, yes. And final moral of the story, take it from a legendary Australian pioneer. Sometimes you can commit yourself completely to a goal, nearly kill yourself in the process. Everyone can tell you you're crazy. You are insane for believing. But if you persevere